Hello and welcome back to another episode of the For the Property Investor podcast. And we're here with the weekly news, which means we've got Nick Bendel with us. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Owen. Great to see you.
Yes, great to see you too. What's been happening in your week for the past week?
For the past week,
Yeah,
yes, that's the typical time frame for a week. Well,
yeah, true.
it has been an enjoyable week. I was about to say busy. I never say busy. It's been a productive week.
Productive,
My
yes.
company, Hunter and Scriber, a content writing agency. We write content for finance and property businesses. We're currently ghostwriting 2 business books for a mortgage broker and a remedial builder. And we're currently in talks to write another book for a modular builder. That's something that's happened in the past few days.
Wow, that's interesting.
Hmm.
Modular builder, writing a
Yes.
book. Are you learning? Yeah.
I just missed that. Able to repeat it, Owen?
Yeah. Are you learning how to swing a hammer at the same time?
Well, she hasn't actually, it is a she, by the way. She hasn't actually signed on yet. So there has been no learning of any hammer swinging just yet.
Okay. Well, that'll be an interesting one. Well, good to hear. Well, we've been productive as well here at Leafield. Of course, leasing lots of properties and getting lots of property management related activities done. And of course, it's not just end of month this week, it's end of financial year. I mean, that's an exciting time in our world. Lots of things happen. And everyone's racing to get expenses in before the end of the year or income, all depending on what their situation is. So lots of things happening right now.
Well, yes, things are busy, and we've got 3 very interesting news stories today.
Yes, hit us with it.
There's been a lot of news, so hard to narrow it down to just 3. Our first one today is government rocks property sector with surprise SMSF ban. The federal government has banned self-managed superannuation funds from taking out loans to purchase residential property, while leaving intact their ability to borrow for commercial property acquisitions. The ban targets limited recourse borrowing arrangements, or LRBAs, which have long provided a mechanism for SMSFs to gear into property despite a general prohibition on super funds borrowing to invest. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said multiple inquiries, including the Coalition's 2014 Murray Financial System inquiry, had raised concerns about the risks these arrangements pose to retirement savings. He noted that LRBAs represent less than 1% of total residential property borrowing nationally. But Pippa Chair Kate Bakos pushed back sharply. She said the ban would hurt ordinary investors who turn to SMSFs specifically because they can no longer achieve serviceability outside superannuation. Our government's willingness to trim the wings of those who are working hard to safely grow their wealth within an SMSF vehicle is disappointing, Bakos said, arguing that superannuation was always intended to help Australians retire with greater financial security than the age pension could provide alone. Owen, I would love to get your thoughts. What do you think of the government's SMSF reforms?
Oh, completely agree with Kate. This is complete madness. It's like they didn't bring it up in the original budget. They've caved to be able to just get their budget pushed through to the whim of the Greens, and they're really just killing off any ability for the struggling average person out there to get ahead. Like, this is not going to hurt wealthy people at all. The wealthy people have moved on from self-managed super funds. They don't need it. And they're certainly not using their super to invest. They might have originally, but anyone who's considered wealthy is not using their super anymore to invest in property and certainly not borrowing for it. They've got much better vehicles that they can use with a lot more flexibility to be able to buy much better properties. The typical wealthy person doesn't necessarily invest in residential property. And if that's what they specialize in, then they're not using their super fund as a structure to do so. So it's complete idiocy. They're killing. For the person who can't afford to buy their own home because they can't afford to buy where they need to live. They were going to go out there and buy an investment property where they could afford, at least in their personal name. And that got killed off because all of the negative gearing benefits, which would help them to service the loan, have been taken away, unless they're buying a brand new property, which isn't necessarily the best property to be buying anyway. And depending on what their goals are. So that's been taken away from them. And now they were looking at turning to super to be able to actually buy an investment property to help them save for their future retirement. This was their last hope. And now it's taken away. So all it's going to do is widen the gap between the wealthy and the not so wealthy. It's because the wealthy are not concerned by this at all. They're not concerned about negative gearing benefits taken away. They're not necessarily that concerned by CGT discounts taken away. They can work around all of them because they've got the ability to do so. It's the people who are trying to get ahead, trying to get into their first property, maybe their second, that this would all help. And yes, they want to take the burden off the taxpayer down the track in the future. But no, it's just ridiculous.
Let me play devil's advocate here. You made the point, which I agree with, that the government wouldn't have done this if not for the need to do a deal with the Greens. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not good policy, even though they were kind of forced into it by the Greens. The Prime Minister said these reforms would protect people's savings. Isn't that a valid justification for this reform?
It's an ignorant one. It's it's just obvious that he doesn't know what he's talking about. And even if that was true, who is he to be telling people what to do with their own money? I mean, it's already within Superfund, within the superannuation legislation. So it's already highly regulated what they can and can't do. So why not give the freedom for people to be able to invest in something that they know, like, and trust, which is residential property?
Speaking of, as part of these reforms, you can no longer borrow money to buy a residential property in super, but you can still borrow money to buy a commercial property. Do you think this will lead to a meaningful increase in commercial property investing?
There'll be some that will, but I don't think people who don't understand commercial property will not want to invest in it. And they're usually the same people that don't necessarily understand what shares are and how they work. So these are the people who know, like, and trust residential property as an investment vehicle. And these are the people that wanted to do it within their super. These are the people that you're going to hurt. The unsophisticated, not wealthy investor.
Let's move on to our next story. Sydney auction clearance rate hits lowest level since 2021. Sydney's auction market has weakened significantly, with the city's clearance rate falling to its lowest level in 5 years. According to Domain, just 47% of properties scheduled for auction over the June 20 to 21 weekend sold under the hammer, down from 69% during the same weekend the year before. Main Chief of Research and Economics Nicola Powell said the figures highlighted a growing disconnect between buyer expectations and seller price ambitions. She said clearance rates remain one of the strongest indicators of housing market conditions, and the consistently weak results suggest buyers are becoming increasingly reluctant to meet Bendel's reserve prices. Powell said the buyer pool has become shallower and that market conditions have clearly shifted in favour of buyers, who now have greater negotiating power and less urgency to make purchasing decisions. While winter is traditionally a quieter period for housing activity, Powell said the real test would come in spring, when a larger volume of properties is expected to hit the market. Whether buyer demand can absorb that additional supply will provide a clearer indication of where Sydney's housing market is heading. Oh, and this is an interesting one. How would you assess the current state of Sydney's property market, or at least the sales side of things?
Yeah, on the sales side of things, it's there's definitely been a turn in the market. And it's definitely at the top end of the market. So, when they're quoting, Sydney house prices are going to come back by $100,000, they're not talking about a $600,000 or a $700,000 unit coming back by 100,000. They're talking about higher end properties that dropping that much. If you look at the lower ends, though, there'd still be activity because you've still got you've got the first home buyers who are trying to get into the market. You've still got investors who are trying to get into the market, and instead of them buying high quality properties, they're now competing even more so with first home buyers because they're restricted in terms of their borrowing capacity. But investors might be looking elsewhere anyway. Sydney isn't necessarily the number one choice for investors because the return is so low. But this is where, this really, all of these recent changes, really hands it to the wealthy investor who's already in a position where they can take advantage of prices dropping. Because they're not really too concerned about getting negative gearing benefits. So if prices drop and rents increase, which we're seeing as well, then that's only going to help the investor in the long run. But the current state of the Sydney market is it depends on where exactly, what price point. Yes, the topper end is difficult. And there's overall less demand because you're seeing that the interest rate rises that we had in the beginning of the year are really taking effect. And then all these budget changes were just kicking everyone in the guts while they're out there trying to find something to buy.
You gave a really good overview of the Sydney sales market. I just want to drill down now into the auction market. Do you think the low clearance rate is primarily a buyer confidence issue, or are sellers simply refusing to adjust their price expectations?
Oh, it's probably a bit of both. It's you probably have got less buyers out there because their borrowing capacity has been hit, mainly due to interest rates, changes in lending policy, and of course, if any investors were ready and out there looking, then their borrowing capacity has been changed. But we were already seeing this slowdown at the beginning of the year starting to happen, well before the budget got put down. So it's not really surprising. Yes, we're coming into winter as well with the slowdown, but we've had a very hot market in Sydney for a long time. And even though it had already slowed down, it was still going up. So it's it's just a cycle. I'm not really too concerned. We'll see this happen for about 12 months, and then we'll see likely see things start to tick along again.
I'm just wondering, when a city's sales market is struggling, does that have any impact at all on the rental market, or are the two things completely segregated from each other?
Not completely segregated, but yeah, there's no direct impact, or immediate impact really. Yes, if there's not the biggest impact on the rental market is the amount of supply. So if we see less investment properties out there available for rent, then yes, you'll start to see rents go up, which we already are starting to see that happen, because there's less investors starting to buy, especially in Sydney, and because they're really just priced out, and they haven't got the capacity to be able to borrow more, and to be able to get into the Sydney market especially.
Our final story, we are going to move from the bright lights of Sydney to the regions. Australians embracing tree change and sea change lifestyles. Australians are moving from the capital cities to regional areas in record numbers, according to the latest Regional Movers Index from Commonwealth Bank and the Regional Australia Institute. Quarterly report found net migration from the capitals to the regions reached its highest level since the index began. During the March quarter, the number of people relocating from capital cities to regional Australia exceeded those moving in the opposite direction by 29.7%. Regional Australia Institute Chief Executive Liz Ritchie said the figures confirm the enduring appeal of regional living despite ongoing economic uncertainty. She said the shift had remained remarkably consistent through major events including the pandemic, rising inflation, housing affordability pressures, and a tighter labour market. Rather than slowing, the trend has continued to strengthen. Owen, why do you think there are more people moving from the cities to the regions and vice versa?
Well, I think during the pandemic, COVID-19, it certainly opened up the possibilities of people of where they could go, and and so people have the confidence now. It's just like making that change before was not really something they considered unless they could get a local job. Now, people can, a lot of the time, if they've got the flexibility with their employer, they can work remotely. Or if they only need to be in the office a couple of days a week, then it'd be possible to commute. So that's what has given people the ability to actually seriously consider moving to the regions. Now, in terms of what's driven them to actually think of it, it's like, well, it comes down to the cost of living pressures, cost of housing. You can for what you pay for a 2-bedroom apartment in close to the city, you can get a 4-bedroom house in the regions. So it's lifestyle, quality of life, not being stuck in traffic for hours at a time, just to go a few kilometers down the road. So it's it's just those common sense things. People want a slower pace of life that's not as hectic. But the big thing is cost of living, cost of housing, better quality of life, especially if they've got a family, and they want to enjoy life.
You've done a good job of explaining the appeal of the regions. I'm wondering, should we have any opinion about this record move to the regions? Is it good for the country? Is it bad for the country? Is it neutral? Do we care?
I think it's a good thing. It's to have more people moving out into the regions. It means that if there's more demand in those regions, then more housing will need to be built in those regions, which it means more jobs for people in the regions, and less strain on the infrastructure in the major cities. And it's so I think longer term, it's a good thing.
And speaking of the longer term, Owen, if this trend continues and regional migration keeps accelerating, what does the Australian property landscape look like in 10 or 20 years' time?
Well, I think it'd be exciting. There'd be a lot more markets to choose from. And to give people choice of where they buy to live and where they buy to invest. The more investment properties out there, then it gives the ability for people to be more mobile. Because remember, we pay that god-awful stamp duty tax every time we buy. Which is the stupidest tax in the world, and is the one that we should be talking about in budgets about getting changed to help affordability in the property market. It's I think it's be exciting if we've got more markets to look at, more markets for buying and selling in, that's a healthy property market rather than, I remember even 20 years ago, but especially 30 years ago, and which is almost how long I've been working in this industry. People in Sydney didn't even consider buying in other capital cities. They just didn't think it was safe to do so. If you can afford to buy in Sydney, why would you buy anywhere else? And if you talk to anyone in the eastern suburbs, there's just like of Sydney, then they didn't understand why you'd want to buy anywhere else but the eastern suburbs. Property didn't exist. The end of civilization was the airport, and then you went somewhere else. But that's having a go at Sydney people. But it was much the same in other capital cities. You'd buy where you know, and you'd buy in where you live if you were buying an investment property. So yes, the market has definitely changed. Certainly helped by the rise of the buyer's agent, and I think the advice of a good buyer's agent moving forward is going to be something that's very much needed.
Well, I'm a Sydney boy, but I really love regional Australia, and I would love to see some of our regional cities keep growing and prospering in the years ahead. Places like, I don't know, Bathurst or Dubbo or Gladstone or Rockingham. These are all great places, and I would love it if instead of our population, 2/3 of our population in half a dozen cities, it would be better, I think, if we had something like America where they've got lots of cities with relatively small populations. And I think it leads to more variety and makes the economy more vibrant.
Yeah, certainly does. And it'd be a lot healthier for us as a country. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for another great chat, Owen. Bit disappointed you said something bad about stamp duty. I thought maybe today would be the week you said something good about stamp duty, but might have to wait until next week for that.
Never. Thank you, Nick. And yes, we will see you next week for the weekly news.